Hi guys, it's day 56 and you've got me, Kate, again. Very sorry, but me and Neil can't apparently work a rota and we keep getting confused which day we're on. So officially, as of next week, I'm only on a Wednesday. You won't have to put up with me twice a week, sorry. I'm, as you can see, in the glamorous kitchen of the coffee shop. The band are practicing, hoping they're not going to disrupt me again or my batteries aren't going to die or something like that. So we'll give it a go and see if we get interrupted. Today I'm going to talk to you from the New Testament, and we're going to look at Mark. It's chapter 18, verse 14 onwards. Key thing about all of this is basically the disciples didn't get what Jesus was talking about. And I like that because I can relate to them, because I don't always get what Jesus is talking about. I don't always get things that I read in the Bible, that I hear in preachers, or that people share, or even sometimes something I feel God's placing on my heart or just trying to speak to me. I don't always get it, and so I love that we can relate to the disciples, and they were just a bunch of average sort of Joes, and I like that. Basically, Jesus says to them in verse 15, "Be careful," Jesus warned them, "warned out for the yeast of the Pharisees and that of Herod." They thought that Jesus was talking about the fact they didn't have any bread. He wasn't, but I like the fact that they thought that, and they were all confused. In verse 17 onwards, Jesus basically says, "Why are you talking about having no bread? Do you still not see or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Do you have eyes but fail to see, and ears but fail to hear?" He basically lists them a couple of questions that I think are really key questions we should ask ourselves. If we're not getting something that God is trying to communicate to us, maybe these are questions we should come back to. Do we not see or understand because our hearts are hardened for whatever reason? Are we not really wanting to hear what God's saying? We're kind of pushing it away and toughening ourselves because we don't actually want to accept what He's got to say. Are we being silly? Because if you've got eyes and can't see, or ears but not hear, it seems daft, it seems pointless. And I kind of like the fact that sometimes God's probably doing the same with us. He's probably thinking, "Kate, why can't you see this? You've got eyes and you can't see it, ears and you can't hear it." My favourite bit is the next bit. Basically says, "And don't you remember when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many basketfuls of pieces did you pick up?" 12, they replied. So he's also saying, do you not remember all the things I've done? Do you not remember all the things that you've seen me do? And we're the same. I think sometimes we can be in a situation or a circumstance and really need answers from God. We can really need answers to prayers, and we sometimes doubt and worry and panic and fear and think that He can't do it. And we need to go back over the things that we've seen Him do in our lives and remember what He's done for us, remember His goodness and His mercy and His grace and His power. We need to remember that the Bible says everything's possible for those who believe, so we need to believe. The Bible basically says nothing's impossible for God, so we need to remember who He is. But this didn't really have much of an impact, because then Jesus said again about another miracle. They remembered again about this other miracle, but they still didn't get it. It still didn't make sense to them what Jesus was talking about. And I love that, because you know what, when I read this stuff about the yeast, I didn't get it. I read all this and I still didn't get it. So I love the fact that the disciples and me are in the same boat here. So based on what I said yesterday, I decided to take up my own advice and I looked it up. I didn't get it, so I went to a Bible called the Life Application Bible, which has got notes and things in it. And it basically says, in verse 15, yeast represents evil. And this is my interpretation, I think, here. Is, you know, yeast is that tiny little substance that they put in bread, and it makes, well, in the dough, and makes it rise so that it can become bread, and it's soft and fluffy and lovely. They only use a tiny amount of yeast when they make bread, and I believe that just like with bread you need a tiny amount of yeast to make a big impact, it's the same with evil. That tiny amount of evil can have a huge impact. It can lead on to other things. It can rise and grow and become much, much more. Now this Life Application Bible, the notes basically said that the Pharisees and Herod were hard-hearted. They didn't believe that Jesus was the Messiah, and they really wanted to see Him brought down. They were challenged by Him, and they were basically contaminating those around them. They were telling people not to believe Jesus. They were basically branding him a criminal. So they were contaminating society and all those around him to rise up against Jesus. So if the disciples had spent some time with them and let that little bit of yeast, that little bit of evil that they had, affect them, it would have been disastrous to the disciples. And we need to reflect that and think back now for us. Is there something that we might do, or someone we might spend time with, or something we're aware of that we just think, I'll just do a little bit, I'll just do a tiny bit, I'll just spend a bit of time, or I'll just do that once. It's like everything, it leads on to more. And just like the yeast, it could be a tiny thing, but that small amount of contact with anything that's not of God, not pure, anything that's evil, can really have a huge impact on us and our lives and our relationships with Jesus, and to be quite honest guys, sometimes our salvation as well. So again, we need to watch out for that. Moving on from that, the next story that is included is the healing of the blind man. And I like this story, but it confuses me. So I'm just going to sort of run over it with you guys. Verse 24, basically, Jesus has touched, he spat on the man's eyes and put his hands on him, touched him, and he asked him, do you see anything? And in verse 24, the man looked up and he says, I see people. They look like trees walking around. So first he was blind, Jesus then touched him, performed a miracle, and the guy could partly see. Then Jesus repeated this, and once more he touched his hands on the man's eyes, and then his eyes were opened, his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. So firstly he was blind, then he partially saw, then he fully could see. And I wondered why this was. I was challenged by it. Was it that Jesus, I don't know, maybe he hadn't put enough spit on his eyes, or maybe he hadn't really been trying? I don't believe that at all, says Jesus. I think he always knows exactly what he's doing, and it wasn't a thing of lack of power. He didn't need a second touch just to boost it up a bit to heal him. He's trying to say something to us. And basically I think that this is representing spiritual healing as well, and spiritual truth. See, sometimes, we can hear in the Bible, and we can talk about, just like we did a couple of verses ago, not being able to see. And sometimes it's that seeing things as God sees them, seeing things properly, seeing things in a spiritual truth. And just like the disciples and us, sometimes we get things gradually. Sometimes at first God tries to tell us something, we get it a bit, and then he'll tell us again, or we'll seek him again, and then we'll get it. Sometimes I need to just keep seeking and keep seeking and keep seeking, and then I'll get it. See, I think it's just trying to show us that this bit of healing, it's not always just, it's definitely not always, it's just not at all God's problem. I think it was the man that sort of limited the healing, and that he needed to let Jesus to touch him again and have that impact. And we need to do the same if we're not getting things, if we're starting to see things clearly, but it's still not completely fully clear. We need to spend more time with him. We need to ask him again, we need to seek him again, and just keep seeking him. So important. Just moving on from that, there's a couple of things I want to point out. I have to say, the rest of the reading from Mark, there's so much amazing stuff there. There's some amazing scriptures. And I'm 9 minutes in, and I don't want to bore you, but I just want to whiz over 3 things quickly. Verse 33, basically, Jesus has been talking just before this about his death and predicting his death, and Peter takes him aside and kind of tells him off and says, rebukes him. Jesus' response is not nice. It's quite harsh, very harsh, I'd say. He says, "Get behind me, Satan." And what is that about? Is he saying that he looked at Peter and Satan suddenly appeared, or that he felt that Peter was Satan in disguise? And basically what I feel is going on here, and hopefully this is right, is that Peter was speaking from his own knowledge and actually his own love and concern for Jesus. The idea of thinking about Jesus dying wasn't something he wanted to think about or could probably understand. But see, the enemy used that to his advantage. Satan used that because he knew if he could put Jesus off going to the cross, the impact that would have on the whole world would be huge. It'd be just, we can't even imagine what would happen. We wouldn't have salvation, guys. And so Jesus had to fulfill God's plan. So when he had Peter essentially putting him off, he knew this was a trick of the enemy. The enemy was using Peter, for his own plan and purpose. So that's just a bit of clarity there, hopefully. Quickly as well, verse 34 to 35, Jesus is talking to the crowd and the disciples, and he says, "If anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me and for the gospel will save it." Now, for some people, back in the times of the disciples, so some people did have actual crosses. Some people, did die on a cross and they were martyred. Some of them really did sacrifice their lives for Jesus, and there are still many people across the world who do that. But it's more than just that for us, guys. There's more meaning in it than that. It's basically saying, it was a huge sacrifice for Jesus to go to the cross. He sacrificed his life. And we all have things to sacrifice. We thank God, we don't have to do that and we don't have to experience that. But we all have things we have to sacrifice and let go of. We'll all face challenges and difficulties and have to carry those with us like Jesus carried the cross. Even basic things like overcoming selfishness. It's a huge deal sometimes. But sacrifices are always worth it. This is what I see that God shows us, is that whenever we make a sacrifices for him, it's always worth it. And I think Jesus is being honest with us as well. We can't expect to have a relationship with him and follow him and it just be plain sailing and actually not have to lose certain things and gain different ones, and then we always need to remember it's always worth it. And for whatever we sacrifice, what little we sacrifice, is just completely incomparable to Jesus' sacrifice for us. Finally, guys, you'll be breathing a sigh of relief now. Verse 36 to 37, I couldn't finish this without mentioning. This is probably one of the most incredible and impactful verses in the Bible, I believe anyway. "What good is it for man to gain the whole world, yet forfeit his soul?" And you know what? People always forget this bit on the end, verse 37. "Or what can man give in exchange for his soul?" Basically, guys, we can have everything. We could have all the money in the world. We could have all the riches. We could have the most amazing family life, personal life, the most amazing career. We could have it all. And without Jesus, still have absolutely nothing. We just need to look at the media. We just need to look at history and see that there are many, many people who have all the wealth and look like they've got it all. Yet for some reason, they're still not right. They'll turn to drugs and alcohol and sex and gambling and all sorts of things to try and overcome it. But the fact is, if you don't have Jesus, you won't ever have it all. And people will try and get the satisfaction from all these other things. And sometimes as Christians, I think we can fall into the trap of thinking we need those things too. And we need to remember that Jesus is enough. He really, really is enough. And I love that bit at the end. What can man give in exchange for his soul? You could be Bill Gates and still not buy your salvation. It's something very, very different, something from the heart, and something that you need to experience with Jesus. And we need to remember, really, our most valued possession is our soul, and it's up to us what we do with it. It's our choice what we do with that valued possession, that most important thing. And again, we needn't be sad or disappointed or jealous of others who have deemed to be having everything, because really the most important thing that we need in our lives is Jesus. And that's where I'm going to finish tonight. So good night, and I'll see you next Wednesday.